Hola, seguidores, seguidoras del grupo Grite. Hoy tenemos no solamente un invitado especial, como siempre hemos tenido, sino que además es una entrevista especial, en parte porque es una persona cuyas investigaciones yo estoy siguiendo en mi segundo doctorado y es una persona cuyas columnas en la revista Fortean Times, que les recomiendo mucho que consigan y lean la revista Fortean Times, o si no, la página web de nuestro entrevistado y su trabajo, la verdad que últimamente, en estos últimos años, me ha fascinado y lo leo con mucho placer. Así que es un invitado a que de verdad tengo muchas ganas de escuchar. Así que muchas gracias. Welcome, Bob Fischer, a this interview.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Okay. For us, it's a very good pleasure. It's an honor to have you with us. Because maybe for the general public, your work, your huge um, task of compilation is not quite well known, but for crazy people like us, it's almost the grial because
Oh,
yes, I would tell you something is very personal if you allow me. But I was born in 1965.
okay.
So the whole thing that you refer continually, mainly the most of the programs of the BBC, I haven't the chance to watch them, but this thing of um, we, the children of them, living together with a haunted uh, environment, promote in many cases for our adults or mentors. It was uh, when the first time I read that, they say, "Dear Lord, this is in front of me, my face always, and it's absolutely true." I used to make a joke about I am a big fan, huge fan and lover of the music of the 70, the band of UK in the 70s. And I used to say that for those days, they put something in the water because they made what they made, and still after 60 years back now,
Yeah.
they are still shivering our spine with this kind of music. But behind this concept of mine, of they put something in the water because they play music a lot related with old traditions,
Yeah.
old short tales, or um, ogres and trolls and this
Yeah.
kind of fantasy guys around that was around the each part of the UK is the same of my understanding of the so-called put something in the water, because it's like a state of mind where you get inside and suddenly not everything is possible. You have no fear, you have no regrets, and you are happy. Because,
That's nice to know.
yeah, and when I the first time I wrote your blog in Fortean in the magazine, I said, this sounds familiar for me,
Right.
and it quite close in another side, because I insist mainly of the BBC shows, although Benny Hill or something like that, we weren't able to watch, but not even Blackadder, for instance. But that sense of fascination, that sense of everything is possible, and you are the main character of the whole ideas, the idea of the old lady, black lady, the death hanging around with you, and you when you splash in a pond or a river, and all these kind of little things
Yeah.
that nowadays the crystal um, generation will not only not appreciate it, but say how kind of beast give this kind of entertainment to their children.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, even though being a horror writer, me myself, I grew up without any trouble, much more of the trouble of somebody of my age and in my country and in my age. But anyway, I'm not a serial killer or something like that. So really, 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 sorry, I extend a lot, but
Not at all.
when I first read your papers, I said, "Oh, this is what I wasn't looking for, but this is what I trying to explain about the music,
Yeah.
this state of mind, this capability of connect with the not only the inner you, but the inner community."
That's really kind of you to say so. I never intended to build any kind of community around the things that I write. But the same as you, I'd always had an interest in my own childhood, I guess. It's probably very self-indulgent, but I'd always been fascinated by the feelings of my own childhood. And I'd always struggled in a way to express those feelings. And I tried, so I'm a little bit younger. Sorry, I was born in 1972. So when I became an adult in the 1990s, I remember trying to explain to my friends that I had these strange memories of my childhood, and they were very much memories of watching TV on days when I was unwell, when I was off school, when it was raining, when there was nothing on British TV apart from educational schools programs, or indeed nothing at all on TV, just a static test card and some music. And just all of this seemed to feed into these memories that I had of life being quite strange, of like you say, folklore bleeding through into children's TV programs. A program like Bagpuss that I loved as a kid, and it's a program with puppets. It's about a cat who runs a shop. But it incorporates folk music, it incorporates folk tales, and I just became fascinated by all of these feelings, and I was kind of unaware that other people felt the same way about their own childhoods in the 1970s, because when I tried to explain those feelings, people would just misunderstand. I said, no, I sort of know what you mean. Or they'd talk about things that were overtly scary. So things like Doctor Who that were intended to be scary. But for me, it's often the programs that weren't intended to be scary that I find most affecting. So I had trouble explaining this to people. And then in 1999, I heard one song by the band Boards of Canada that just, it was so reminiscent of those feelings I had about my 1970s childhood. It's a song called Roy G. Biv on their album Music Has the Right to Children. And it uses 1970s synths, it uses the sound of children playing. And it was a genuine moment for me of, my God, somebody else has the same feelings about their childhood. And I genuinely remember hearing that song and crying. It was a breakthrough moment for me. So that was the first time that I became aware that other people felt that their 1970s childhoods were somehow haunted by all of this weird stuff. And it took probably another 10 years before I moved quickly. It took about another 10 years before I started to really investigate the music being made that was inspired by those feelings. So I think it was about 2010 that I found a record label called Ghostbox, where basically everybody on Ghostbox is inspired by those same feelings. And I discovered Scarfolk, which is a project by the artist Richard Littler, and he makes pastiche versions of 1970s public information films and posters that are just terrifying. They're
the best.
They're brilliant but terrifying. So I became aware gradually there was this community of people. What I hadn't realized, or what I didn't realize at that point, was that other people had written about it brilliantly. So writers like Simon Reynolds and Mark Fisher, the incredible Mark Fisher, had written a lot about the scene that they came up with the word hauntology to describe this artistic movement inspired by these feelings from the 1970s. I'm fully aware that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. They're both great writers. So I began to read their work, and I think I'd already started writing for Fortean Times magazine by about 2015. But I became so obsessed by the whole hauntology scene. I thought, I've got to write this. I've got to write something for the Fortean Times about it. So in 2017, I finally wrote a feature called The Haunted Generation, and I interviewed Jim Jupp, who is the co-founder of Ghostbox, and he records music as Bellbury Polly. I interviewed Francis Castle, who runs a label called Clay Pipe. Richard Littler, Scarfolk, I interviewed. Johnny Trunk, who runs Trunk Records, I interviewed. And Simon Reynolds himself very kindly spoke to me. And that became what was only intended to be a single magazine feature. And it was called The Haunted Generation, but it was absolutely intended to be a one-off magazine feature. But as soon as it was published in 2017, I just got inundated on social media with people who'd read it, and they all said the same thing, which was basically, my God, I thought it was just me. Literally everybody said they had no idea that other people had these feelings about their childhood. So it was such a gratifying and humbling experience. And I knew then that I wanted to do more, and it became an absolute passion for me, and a complete, an obsession, really, in all honesty. So it's an ongoing column in the Fortean Times. There is a Haunted Generation column that's been going now since 2019. I think I've written about 40 of them. It became the website. It's now a live show. There's a radio show. I just can't stop doing it. I'm so fascinated by that period and in looking at the feelings and the memories from my own childhood. Like I say, a lot of it is self-indulgent. It's me wanting to unpick and examine my own memories of that era because they interest me so much. They obsess me so much. But it's been amazing just to know that other people have identified with it so much. And amazing that it's reached Argentina. I mean, my God, if you told me 10 years ago, I'd be speaking to two guys in Argentina about my memories of watching TV in the 1970s. What? I never intended it to become anything like this. And I'm genuinely amazed that, people like yourselves are kind of quoting me in academic texts. I'm not an academic at all. But people, academics have said to me, "Oh yes, I've quoted you in my PhD." What? So it's incredibly gratifying. So thank you.
But you are in front of the whales of the whales.
I know my place. No, it's been amazing.
All right.
Hablando un poco, speaking about your background, tengo entendido, correct me if I'm wrong, you
Okay.
start studying linguistics and you move to philosophy, right?
A long time ago. Yeah. Yeah. I went to Lancaster University in the northwest of England, and I did go to study linguistics. I don't really know why, to be honest. I think because I enjoyed writing and I had a teacher at school who said, "Oh, linguistics is the subject for you." So I went to study linguistics and I, I just, it wasn't quite as interesting as I thought it would be. I think I thought there would be lots of creative writing involved and there wasn't. So I changed to philosophy, which I found far more interesting. And I had an amazing philosophy tutor called Colin Lias, who I hope is still out there somewhere. And his speciality, yeah, hi Colin. His speciality was the philosophy of the aesthetic. So it was through Colin that I learned to appreciate music and art and film in a completely different way, in a much more thoughtful way. He was an incredible teacher. So I have to say, if you pressed me, I can't remember a huge amount about my philosophy degree because it was 30 years ago, but I do remember Colin being a tutor that completely changed the way that I look at art. And that has stayed with me. That if I took anything away from Lancaster University, it was Colin's teaching and a lot of debt. So yeah.
As you found some common ground within linguistics and philosophy?
Not really, no. I went to Lancaster to study both at the same time. Lancaster University was very generous in the way that it allowed first year students to, we were allowed to study 3 subjects simultaneously in our first year. So I chose linguistics, philosophy, and sociology. But it became really obvious after a year that philosophy was the subject that really, really fascinated me. I've got to be honest, I can't remember a thing about my linguistics. About the year I spent studying linguistics. I was probably a terrible student. I always think I was too young. I think now 18 is too young to go to university, or it was for me anyway. I don't think I was ready to learn properly. I was still a child. I'd never lived away from home before. I'd never really been away from home before. So I wasn't ready to learn properly at that age. I think most of what I've learned in life has been after university. But I'm glad I went because I had a wonderful time, and I've still got some really close friends from that time as well. So yeah, it's people think that, or people assume that the writing that I've done must be connected in some way to what I studied at university, and it's probably not the case at all, really. I wish it was. I wish I was more of an academic, but I'm not, and I'm afraid.
Speaking about academia, part of your Haunted Generations topic is close to cultural memory.
Yeah.
The way the history is not just hard facts, but
Yeah.
is how we remember history.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really important part of what I do, and a really important part of so much of the modern music and art that I like, that, you know, like Ghostbox, like Scarfolk. It plays with concepts of unreliable memory. So I think my generation, the kids that grew up in the 1970s, I think we grew up in a unique window of cultural time, because certainly with regards to television. So we were the first generation really that had television as a constant companion throughout our childhoods. So my parents were teenagers before they had a television in the house. Whereas me and my friends, we always had television in the house. So it was a constant companion. It was, and I think this is possibly an underexplored aspect, from the early 1970s onwards. Television in the UK became colour, which I think lent television programs of that era an extra vividness. I think that's a big part of all this. But I also think what plays a huge part is that we had a communal experience of television. We all watched the same programs at the same time. So, and it's the only period of television history where that happens. So suddenly in 1970, TV is there, it's on all day, it's in color, so it's vivid, I mean, I had trouble as a very small child differentiating between things I saw on TV and real life. I just had no concept of the fact that they were different. So TV is that vivid in the 1970s. It's constant, it's color, it's in our heads all the time, but we're all experiencing the same programs at the same time. We're not recording things, we're not time shifting, we're not streaming. We're all watching the same programs at the same time. And crucially, I think, we had time in between programs to talk about them at school. So Doctor Who is, you know, any British kid will talk about Doctor Who forever. It's you know, I don't is Doctor Who particularly well known in Argentina? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Doctor Who has been running for over 60 years now on British TV. But in the 1970s, it was episodic. So we all watched the same episode of Doctor Who on a Saturday evening. And there would be a cliffhanger at the end of every episode, which would not be resolved for a week. So for a week at school, we would reenact and episodes of Doctor Who, and we would talk about them, and we would say, how is the Doctor going to escape? And because we were doing that, and because we had no way of rewatching the episodes, which I think is important as well, you know, they were shown on TV once. We had no video recorders. We had no way at all of rewatching them, and no expectation that we'd ever see them again. So because we were replaying these episodes in our heads, and we had no way of checking the things that we were talking about. Our memories of 1970s TV have become distorted because memory is unreliable, especially when you're a child and you're discussing the plots of Doctor Who and making up your own plots of Doctor Who and possibly getting confused with other programs that you've seen that are a bit like Doctor Who. So the plot lines became confused in our heads. And I think that is a huge part of the whole Haunted Generation ethos. And I think I love the fact that what people like Jim and Julian at Ghostbox Records and Richard Littler, Scarfolk, what they do is they create art that sits in the gaps between our memories. So they create music and literature and artwork, and there are TV programs, a wonderful TV program called Look Around You that is a pastiche of 1970s schools programs that appeared on TV in 2001, 2, and again that plays with memory, and these things fill the gaps in our memories with often quite ridiculous art, with quite funny art. And then what they're saying is these things are fictional, but they could be the memories that you have misremembered from the 1970s. And I love that. And I love the fact that I wouldn't want my 1970s childhood memories to be reliable, if that makes sense. I love the fact that I don't remember everything perfectly. And there are still, there are some things from my childhood that I saw on TV. I don't know what they were. I can tell you what they looked like, but I don't know what they were. And I've no way of finding out. And those programs may not even exist anymore. They may have been wiped from the archive. And I like that. I think there's a lot to be said for uncertainty in life and vagueness. I like that.
So memory is unreliable, but history is unreliable as well.
Yeah, yes, I guess. I'd never thought of it that way. Yeah, I mean, I think because so much of what we had as children in the 1970s is now missing. So I always say this. I think there are fewer than 100 photographs taken of me for the first 18 years of my life. Like I just have and I have friends with fewer photographs than that. So in a way, the modern childhood is completely documented. There are probably 100 photographs taken of newborn babies on the first day of their lives. But we don't have that. We don't have that record of our childhoods. There's no moving footage of me at all from until I was about 18 years old. So a big part of this for me is that, yes, like our history is missing. Like it's literally missing. It's never existed. It's our personal history. It's never existed. It's not there. And I think a big part of what we're all exploring is that longing for a past that we cannot quite recapture in the way that modern children will be able to, because we just don't have the materials. We don't have the photographs or the moving footage of ourselves. We don't have the TV programs that we watched as children. They've literally gone from the archives. I think that longing is a huge part of what we all do.
Te pido que traduzcas, Pablo, porque la pregunta es, a question is a little long.
Okay.
Soy un fanático de Children of the Stones, de Service.
Yes.
Y desde nuestra perspectiva, from your now, there is nothing children-like or infantil about these shows now, seeing now.
Yeah.
You see Children of the Stone, you see what is for children in these shows? Even the plots are too complex.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
And you see this is what for children. Why? The whole service is haunting, and I insist that the plots are too complex.
Yeah,
From your contemporary perspective, and now we can see it as children artifacts.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, have you seen the Owl Service?
Yes.
Yeah, which again, you watch it now and you think there is no way this is a children's program. It's such a complex plot. The themes are it's literally all subtext. There's very little overt about it at all. It's brilliant. But the idea of showing this stuff to children and saying, this is a children's program, is very strange in retrospect. I mean, I think The Owl Service was written by Alan Garner, whose work I absolutely love. An extraordinary man. And I think he would say, I don't think Alan Garner would ever describe himself as having written for children. He would just say, I write. And it's for everybody. It's for anybody who reads it. And as a child, I mean, I'm really grateful that I grew up in the era when so-called children's television was incredibly complex. We could. I didn't understand everything that I saw on TV, but I liked the fact that I didn't understand everything. I wanted to be challenged, I think, as a child. But I also think it was an era when people involved within the television industry were happy to do that. And they thought they almost had a duty to produce programs that were challenging and that would make children think and would expand their horizons, and introduce new concepts to them. I'm not sure that exists so much anymore. I mean, which isn't to say that lots of people working on television for children, there are some great people working on TV programs, but I just can't imagine anything of the complexity of Children of the Stones or the Owl Service being shown on a dedicated children's TV channel these days. I can't imagine it now. I think somebody somewhere along the line would say this is far too complex for children. We can't do it. But I don't think that happened in the 1970s, and I'm glad of that.
You talk about your interviews. You have interviewed the writer of the Osborne Books of Ghosts.
Yes.
The Osborne Books of Ghosts, que fue publicado, is what published in Spanish. So find them, it's out there in Spanish. The Osborne Books for Ghosts. It was for children. It's really creepy, really traumatic and creepy.
Yeah, definitely. I remember reading the Osborne Book of Ghosts in my school library.
You can testify this was for
this is yeah, absolutely. So my school had a copy in the library, and I would have been, I think, about 6 years old. And I sat down and I knew about ghosts anyway. I possibly didn't quite understand that they were meant to be the spirits of dead people, but I knew that ghosts were scary. And I sat down with the Osborne Book of Ghosts, and I started turning the pages, and I reached the page. So it's the Newby Hall ghost, which is basically it's a picture reputedly taken in the 1960s of it's a church altar with a ghost standing next to it. Yeah, you know the one?
Yes, very creepy, in
So
black and white.
yeah, so it's the ghost of a monk, or possibly a nun, with a blank face and a really long habit, and it's translucent. You can see through it. You can see the church steps behind it. And I just saw that picture, and I think that was genuinely the first time that a feeling of utter dread went through me. And I had a nightmare about it that night. And I was for probably about 2 years, I was convinced that ghost would come and find me, that it would come up our stairs in the house, and look for me. And the interesting thing about the Usborne Book of Ghosts, it basically presents everything as basically being factual. It's the message of the book is essentially ghosts are probably real. So for me, as a 6-year-old, I just found that terrifying. And from speaking to people of my generation, it's a fairly common experience. But yeah, I did when the book was reissued in 2019, and I I think I contacted Usborne and said, "Oh, I'd love to do something about the reissuing of the book." Um, and I didn't even know who had written it because I think it's uncredited, the original version of the book. But yeah, we worked out who the writer was, and he was a Canadian writer called Chris Maynard, who was very young when he wrote it. He would have been in his mid-20s possibly when he wrote it. And he was just a jobbing writer. He had no great interest in ghosts or folklore at all. It was literally just a job for him. He thinks he wrote dozens and dozens of books for Usborne on different subjects. But we managed to track down Chris, and I met him in London, and basically told him that he had traumatized me as a child and given me a recurring childhood nightmare that lasted for 2 years. And I think he was quite gratified by that. He seemed to think that was a job well done. But no, those books are touchstones, I think, for all of us that grew up in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, they're amazing.
Pablo, te pido que me ayudes con esta.
Dale.
No toda la narrativa traumática de los 70 tiene que ver con la narrativa en sí, sino que muchas veces está relacionado con la estética. The aesthetics are very creepy as well. I think pienso en Pactus.
Yes.
Para los que no lo vieron, se puede ver en YouTube. La intro de Pactus es básicamente música triste, todo está en sepia, fotos, creepy photos about children in the past, and aesthetically, it's weird.
Yes.
Y la pregunta, Pablo, es ¿cómo esto fue pensado para chicos? ¿Cómo llevas esto? ¿Cómo la parte de Haunted Generation es acerca de los aspectos estéticos, perdón, de esos programas también?
All right. Considering the addition of all these subjects Fernando named, like pictures in ochre colors, ancient photos that besides the granulate, they maybe could be Edwardian photos from Edwardian time. And this of kind of environment that precede the presentation of the show. The question is, how do you think, or what they think? What do they think about this kind of product for children? Because nowadays we are very contaminated with, all the agendas and
Yeah.
all the kind of stuff that it was for me find some death ray and say, let the people live, read whatever they want, and none of your business. But anyway,
Yeah.
How they think they can offer a product not only for children, that this product will be successful with this environment that just from the beginning was an invitation to the navigate, if I may, between the two pretty close, like, in Samhain, in the Celtic culture, base of reality and the other world. So how they come with the idea and how they could think that the idea will be a success.
It's
What do you
interesting.
think?
I think, I mean, in terms of that Edwardian feel, I think Britain's always been obsessed with the past, I think. And I think we often use the past as something reassuring to hang on to when modernity is just a little bit too scary or when it's moving too fast. So I think in particular in the 1960s, you've got the British Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who says I think in 1964, he makes this big speech about how he wants to build a new Britain from the white heat of technology. And suddenly we're being shown these ideas of the future that are very much about computers, about robots, about the space race, about space exploration. And I think it's possibly a little bit too much for some people. So I think certainly by the late 60s, early 1970s, you've got a kind of pushback against that embracing of the future that is very much about embracing the old ways, about embracing folklore, embracing old religion, even. I think this is a pivotal moment in British culture. The Witchcraft Act, which made it illegal to declare that you were a witch or that anybody else was a witch, that was abolished in 1951, which seems extraordinarily late to me. And as soon as it was abolished, you suddenly get this explosion of interest in religions like Wicca, which very much takes, ostensibly it's a new religion, but it takes elements of much older religious practices and combines them into something new. It's a completely, a totally legitimate new religion, and I find it fascinating. But suddenly in the 1960s, it's being kind of corrupted in the British press and being made to look as though, people who are practicing Wiccan religions are the press, the newspapers are basically saying they're Satanists, they're devil worshippers, and they're having sex orgies to worship the devil, which is nonsense. But that was what public perception of it was at the time. So there's that interest in Wicca as well, and I think all of this, I think it combines a little bit with psychedelia as well, and the whole the countercultural psychedelic revolution of just looking for something beyond the everyday, beyond, you know, below the surface of normal everyday life of work and family. You know, I think with psychedelia comes this much more widespread quest to find something a little bit more profound, possibly a little bit more out there. I think it all combines. So suddenly by the 1970s, you've got these things all coming together in this very strange but rather beautiful cultural moment. And I think what TV, and certainly TV of the 1970s, is reactive. You know, it just looks at what's out there and says, you know, what are people talking about? What can we make TV programs about? What's in the air? What's in the newspapers? What are people talking about? And by the early 1970s, for all of the reasons that I've talked about, it is the occult. It's witchcraft. It's strangeness and this obsession with a past that just seems far more kind of vivid, possibly dangerous, weird, evocative. So naturally, that bleeds through into the TV of the era, and I'm very glad that it did. So I think that's, if you look at 1970s, it's a children's program in the 1970s for, you know, for years. It's just riddled with stone circles and witchcraft and occult ceremonies.
Paganism.
Say again.
Paganism.
Yeah, it's just everywhere. So yeah, I think it was, again, I think it's a unique window of popular culture. It's a unique moment at the time when all of this strange stuff is fascinating people. We're suddenly in a position where TV is everywhere. It's on constantly. It's part of every child's life. And the people that are making TV programs are saying, yes, give that to the kids. They love it. And we did.
Can we argue that maybe this part of this interest on the esoteric and the pagan past is due because England was losing identity through the 70s?
Yeah.
The process of decolonization, etc., etc. Maybe some way of will find your identity back, going
It's
to your
yeah.
roots.
Yeah, I get that. I think it's I mean the 1970s was a troubled time in England and in the UK. We had it's probably the closest we've come to having an actual revolution in the UK was in the 1970s, when you've suddenly got this huge clash of political ideologies, a really like a very strong union movement, who are looking for, you know, good conditions and good pay for all of their members, and often a succession of governments that tried to push back against that. And there was a point in around 1973 when, you know, the kind of retired army majors, like kind of building private armies, convinced there was about to be a socialist revolution, and that, you know, they had to fight against it. It was quite a troubled time, and my personal memories of this are very, very scant because I was very young at the time. But from speaking to people that were there, it was a fractious era. And you had lots of industrial action in the UK in the early 1970s. So there was a period where we basically had what was called the 3-day week, where industry closed down for 2 days of the working week because the mine workers were on strike and there wasn't enough coal to fuel industry, and there were power cuts everywhere. Now, for me as a child, I found all that quite exciting. A power cut? That's brilliant. There's no electricity. We'll have to light a candle and play board games. I thought that was wonderful. And I think that's a big, my nostalgia for the 70s is a child's nostalgia. For my parents, who were trying to build a home, trying to bring me up, it possibly wasn't quite as much fun. There was very little money around in the 1970s, so it was a strange era, yeah, quite possibly. Like I say, I think when things are difficult in the UK, we look to the past sometimes for reassurance and it's like a comfort blanket, I think, sometimes, and one that I use as well. What am I doing now? We're in troubled times again. And here I am, kind of like wrapping myself in the nostalgia of the 1970s, which were troubled times in their own right. So maybe we're all just caught in this constant loop of nostalgia and of thinking things were better in the past. They probably weren't, but I think what was better, childhood, by and large, childhood is better than adulthood. And I think that's a big part of the appeal.
We can argue then, a minute, Pablo, please.
Yes.
Excuse me. We can argue that this return to folk horror that we experience now,
yeah,
is because there's a crisis or identity crisis again, maybe as a product from the Brexit and the necessity. Well, we need to find your roots again, and what better than again folk horror? Why folk horror will reappear now after decades of being dead?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I do a live show based around folk horror with part of a live show called Scarred for Life. Myself and Stephen Brotherstone, who wrote the Scarred for Life books, who co-wrote them. We do a live show all about folk horror, and we talk about that in the show. Why has folk horror made such a comeback? Because it was gone. Our memories of the 1980s in particular, we make the argument that Star Wars basically killed folk horror at the end of the 1970s. Yeah. Suddenly every child, the most boring place to be for a child at the end of the 1970s is in a field with a stone circle. We want to be on spaceships in a galaxy far, far away. We want laser beams and robots. So it's gone in the 1980s. I mean, there are always little pockets here and there, but it's nothing like it was in the 70s. But I mean, we think it's come back possibly more widespread than it was in the 70s. And I think it's really interesting. We're amazed at this, but we get young people coming to the shows. People in their, teenagers and people in their 20s. And often their road into folk horror has been Midsummer, which they all adore. And then once they've seen Midsummer, they go backwards and they start to explore films like The Wicker Man, Blood on Satan's Claw. But Midsummer is very much the young person's entrance into folk horror these days. And it's interesting what they say about it. I think, again, like you say, I wonder if it goes back to that reassurance. And again, I wonder if some of it is tied into technology. So just as where in the 1970s we had programs like Bagpuss that are obviously they're on modern television sets, they're in color. you know, they would not exist if it wasn't for that technology. And we embrace that, but we also want Edwardian ochre tinted photographs, creepy children in streets without motor cars. So I think there's that double-edged aspect to the 1970s culture. And I wonder if the modern resurgence of interest in folk horror is also tied into the explosion in social media, AI, and people are saying, yeah, okay, we'll have that, but can we use it to talk about ancient ceremonies and stone circles? It's that combination of the new, the often intimidating new, and the reassuring old that I think is still there, and I think that's a big part of the modern folk horror movement. When we do live shows, I keep calling it. I've only ever come up with two good titles in my life. One of them is The Haunted Generation, and I think there's now a lifestyle choice that I've started to call the Digital Rural. So it's basically, yes, we'd like to live in an abandoned farmhouse with a stone circle in the grounds, but we'd also like to have really good Wi-Fi and access to social media. I think that's a lot of what's going on at the moment.
Yes, and I would like to add, if I may, my first grade at the university was as a lawyer, so
Okay.
I got
Oh God, what have I said?
Huh?
What have I said?
Yeah. Beware what are you saying. And of course, I have a lot of philosophy subjects in different aspects of the life, the history of philosophy, law philosophy, etc. So sometimes combining with being a former rugby player for more than 20 years,
Wow.
I like to step in the field like, the fullback.
Okay.
Watching everything to try to understand what's going on. Not always I'm right, but I like to try to being the little Pablito who tried to, to watch what's inside the any apparel of the kitchen of my mother for her disgrace. And I thought that after centuries of rule Britannia ruled the waves.
I'm sorry about all that.
Don't care. After the Second World War, it's a process of receding the UK possessions, colonialism, navy, all of this stuff that you are familiar. It doesn't matter if you are a UK subject or a citizen of the world. Britannia rules the way.
Yeah.
And I try to think that the people who suddenly have, for centuries, a way of, not of living, but understanding the life, lost everything what made they were.
Yeah.
So in the folklore, old tales, witchcraft, Wiccan, everything is they find a lighthouse where gather all together
Yeah.
and start to form or reform a new personality, if it may say, of what is being the UK in the last 25 years of the century, 20th century. So I think this strong heritage that the UK has about legends, about witchcraft, about all wisdom, the druids, and all of this stuff, in some way made or reestablish the identity, a false identity, because it's much more for the times of Julius Caesar and her soldiers, but having the roots so inner in the magma, which is the UK as a people, going back to these kind of things, in some way operate as a lighthouse, with congregate everybody, trying to find and redefine a new way of life after being the ruling of the ways.
I think that's possibly true. There's a huge generation gap. And people forget, it's easy to forget how quickly the 20th century moved in terms of history, culture, society. So there is a massive generation gap certainly in the UK between, I would say, people born in the first half of the 20th century and people born in the second half of the 20th century. So when my parents went to school in the 1950s, they were absolutely taught about the British Empire. You know, there would be a map on the classroom wall showing the British Empire with countries shaded in pink, I think. This is the empire. These are our countries. We have conquered. Yeah. So the generation that grew up, I mean, I don't want to lump in everybody together. Obviously, there would have been people within that generation that were cynical about that. But that was mainstream culture of the time, I think. And I think the children that were born in the latter half of the 20th century, you know, I went to school, I was only at school 20 years after my parents, and I had none of that whatsoever. I basically went to a hippie school. I had a very progressive schooling where we were just basically encouraged to do what we wanted, to read whatever books we liked, to write whatever stories we wanted to write. It's a huge gap. And I think that, again, psychedelic culture plays plays a big part in that. I think that feeling of, no, we are, you know, all bets are off, basically. You know, in the 1960s in the UK, you have a legalization of homosexuality. I mean, staggering to think it was illegal to be gay in the UK until 1967. You have the legalization of abortion. You have the introduction of the contraceptive pill. You know, as it was called at the time, the permissive society. So, and that's the generation of the latter half of the 20th century. It's an enormous cultural gap. Um, so I think possibly not, or rejecting the idea of empire and of, old-fashioned traditional British culture. That generation, I think, then looked around for what can we have, what can be ours, what can we forge, and that is psychedelic culture. It's weird folk music. It's dabbling with occult practices and looking at anything that falls outside traditional schooling, traditional religion, anything that just expands the mind. So I think that's a massive gap. I also think I think the Second World War plays a huge part in this as well. Um, the fallout, like the psychic fallout from the Second World War, just hung over Britain for decades, to the point where, as a child in the 1970s, I was kind of unsure as to whether the war was still ongoing, because people talked about it so much. It was still, people were still talking about during the war. Oh, they got bombed and he lost his leg. These things were still very, very recent in the memory. Um, and it now seems like a completely different era. But I was only born 27 years after the end of the Second World War. There were still towns, every town in Britain in the 1970s still had bomb damage, still had buildings that had been bombed and destroyed, still had areas that were wasteland because they'd never been rebuilt. So it was still there. And I think the lingering trauma of that was also something that younger people in particular were keen to leave behind. Say, no, we can't keep talking about the war. We need something else. We need some new identity. There's a scene in the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night. There's a scene where the Beatles are in a railway carriage, and they're being told off by an older gentleman for playing their radio loud in the carriage. And he says, I've fought a war for you. And I think it's Ringo says, I'll bet you're sorry you won. I think there was a lot of that around in the 60s and 70s. Kind of, no, we need to move on from the war, and we need to find something else that can define us. So I wonder if that played a big part as well.
All right.
¿Algo para preguntar, Pablo?
No.
My last two questions, I promise, Bob.
Okay, no, it's fine.
Part of the haunted generation is based on traumatic narratives and traumatic aesthetics. We can return to Backpost and the creepy intro that seen today is weird. We don't understand why the sepia tones, colors, the creepy photographs, etc.
Yeah.
But part of these creepy visuals are related to the availability of the era. For example, the jerky movements of the cat, the back pass, are part of what they can do at that time. See, now they look a little creepy.
Yeah.
Because your idea of realism is different. We see VHSs, now they look weird. But a show like Back Pass and the movements of the main cat are weird because your idea of realism has evolutioned, and we see this thing differently.
Yeah. Oh, even at the time, I remember thinking Bagpuss was weird.
Yes.
Absolutely. Honestly, yes. Even when I was 4 years old, I loved Bagpuss, but I knew there was something odd. There was something strange about it. And it's absolutely tied into that. So yeah, the pictures of the children in the opening titles, the Edwardian children, I was really scared.
The music.
Again, I think the music is incredible. Again, it's very old folk music, played by John Faulkner and Sandra Kerr. Sandra Kerr is a good friend of mine. she's wonderful. But the music is music of the past. It's very traditional, very old folk music. Even though it often wasn't, lots of it was written by Sandra and by John Faulkner. Some of it is folk songs from centuries ago. Some of it's new, and I defy anybody to tell the difference. But yeah, the movement of Bagpuss, yeah, it's a very rustic animation style. I think even in the 70s, it looked like it belonged to a different time. And even more so now. But I think that's a huge part of its charm. I think Bagpuss is such a complex program, and it's
very hauntological. It's very hauntological because
it is.
Say its movement belongs to a different era. It's part of this disjunction of times. I
don't think it was. No, it probably was deliberate. But Bagpuss feels like two different times smashed together in a very gentle way.
Yes.
It was made in the 70s. It was broadcast on TV in color. It couldn't have existed at any other time in that way. But it feels like it should have been made in about 1910. It uses the aesthetic of that. And I think that from speaking to Sandra, who did the music, she was really good friends with Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin, who made Bagpuss, wrote it. Oliver Postgate narrated it, and they were much older. So I think they would have been born certainly in the 1920s, I'm guessing. And she thinks Bagpuss is very much Oliver and Peter evoking their own childhood memories of a time when there were shops run by cats and streets without cars and silent towns. So again, yeah, it's a program made in the 1970s by people harking back to their own childhood in the 1920s and 30s. And now here we are in 2026, harking back to a program made in the 1970s about the 1920s. So it's this ongoing process, I think, of culture and media and technology somehow melding with the aesthetics of the past. It's always going on. I love that.
An extra question. Sorry.
Yes.
What had to have modern music, contemporary music, to be considered as hauntological by you? What characteristics?
What should you listen to?
¿Qué estuviste escuchando?
Las recomendaciones que él da en su columna Fortean Times. His recommendations.
Your recommendations in your postcard, in your blogs and wherever.
Yeah.
The bands over there.
Yeah. Anything on Ghostbox Records. So artists like Belbury Polly, the Advisory Circle, Pie Corner Audio, beautiful Portuguese band called Beautified Junkyards, whose music I love. This is a really interesting thing. So for a while, I thought the whole hauntology movement, I thought it was a very British thing. I thought, this stuff is only remembered by people that grew up in the 1970s in Britain. So it's been fascinating for me to speak to people like yourselves and João from Beautified Junkyards, he grew up in Lisbon. He's Portuguese and spent some of his childhood in Brazil. But he totally gets the whole aesthetic of hauntology, which I just find amazing and wonderful. And every country's got their own version of it. So, I speak to someone like Jesse Chandler, who records as Pneumatic Tubes. He's a ghost box artist as well. But Jesse is American. He grew up in Woodstock, amazingly. He grew up in the Catskill Mountains near Woodstock. So whereas, I look back at, stone circles and strange bits of the English landscape, the North Yorkshire moors, for Jesse, and castles that have been ruined castles, and that's the British take on all of this. For Jesse, it's the cabins in the woods, it's the Overview Hotel from The Shining. There's an American version of every country has got its own take on this. So I'm taking a long time to say that I really love the way that Ghostbox Records have explored that and brought in artists from different countries to make their music inspired by their hauntological memories. So Ghostbox, definitely. I love. Oh, there's an artist who I've just written a feature about him, and he's called Keith Seatman, and he records on a label called Castles in Space. And he's one of the funniest people that I know. He's just hilarious. And his music it's one of the best evocations of what it was like just to be a child in the 70s in Britain. It's fairground organs, it's weird sound collages, it's psychedelia, it's snippets of folk music. I love Keith's stuff. He's got a new album coming out soon. Definitely check out Keith's stuff. Anything on the Clay Pipe label. Clay Pipe is a record label run by Francis Castle, who records as the Hardy Tree. It's very much a label connected to landscape and memories of specific landscapes. Kate Brooks, who is the Advisory Circle, she records music for Clay Pipe as well. There's so much. A label called Wayside and Woodland, I really love. A smaller label run by a guy called Ben Holton. He makes albums under the name The Balloonist. And his albums are very much about the stillness of the 20th century childhood. The days when things were just still and silent and there was literally nothing to do. And I think boredom plays a big part in this movement. We had time to live inside our heads in the 1970s, and Ben's music as the balloonist is wonderful. Oh, there's so much, and I've left so many people out here. My recommendation: go to the Haunted Generation website.
Yes,
you'll find all the recommendations you need there.
A very well recommendation.
Read the Fortean Times.
Yes, not only for Fernando and me myself, but for all the audience, we strongly recommend to go to the hunting.
My last question. You speak recently about haunted generation as a term going global. It's true.
Yeah.
We all have your particular vernacular nightmares. But there is something the Argentinians do not have.
Okay.
Can you talk about these weird, creepy little shorts about preventions or accidents that you have that were so weird, and we don't know nothing about that. These creepy little shames were broadcast in television or were broadcast in schools.
Everywhere.
How was that?
Everywhere. Yeah. So they're called public information films.
Yes.
They were produced they were essentially indirectly made by the government. So they were produced by an organization called the Central Office of Information, which sounds Orwellian, but yeah, I mean, they were very, very well intentioned. So most of them are very short. They're often a minute long. But some are longer. And they're basically films that just tell you how to live safely. And some of them are, basically how to exist without killing yourself every day. So lots of them are real, like in retrospect, they look ridiculously patronizing. So a lot of, some of them are about like how to blow your nose, how to sneeze into a handkerchief, how to wash your hands properly. But in the 1970s, there seemed to be a huge change in the nature of public information films in the 1970s. And they basically became, so, don't do this or you will die. Is the message of all of them. And they become like mini horror films. So yes. The one that I love, and I genuinely think it's one of the finest short films ever made, is called The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water. Exactly, Fernando. It's amazing. So it's 90 seconds long, and it's a ghost. It's a spirit who hangs around building sites and ponds and lakes, drowning children. The message being, children, don't play on building sites, don't play near lakes and ponds because the spirit will drown you. And you say, were these shown on TV or in schools? All of the above and more. They could appear on TV without any notice whatsoever. So you could be watching Bagpuss, and the next thing on your screen would be the Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water drowning children. They would be shown in cinemas. They would be shown absolutely in schools. There's a film called Apaches that is about a gang of children who are playing on a farm. And one by one, they die in the most horrendous ways imaginable. They get one of them falls into basically into a vat of shit. One of them's killed by a tractor. One of them drinks rat poison. And the message obviously is, don't play on farms. They're dangerous places. But we were shown that film at school because I grew up in a farming community. So we were shown that film at school when I think I was about 7 when I saw that film. And even now, it's a horrible thing to watch even now. Yes, but they worked. They worked. I know for a fact. The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water film was made because children were drowning. The rates of childhood drowning were far, far too high. And I think within a year of The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water being screened on TV, childhood drownings in the UK had fallen to virtually 0. So nobody wanted to go anywhere near any bodies of water at all. So they did work, but they don't exist anymore. They're not made anymore. But anybody who grew up in Britain in the 1960s, 70s, 80s will be able to tell you about public information films. They are a huge part of our culture. And they are very peculiarly British. Yeah, absolutely. They're our gift to the world.
All right. And here was our, I regret to say, last question, but as we used to do with all our interviewers, the very last question is,
okay,
what are you up to?
Oh, still writing. I still write for the Fortean Times magazine. I write for a music magazine called Electronic Sound that I love. And again, I cover lots of hauntology in my writing for Electronic Sound. I run a small audio company that I co-founded with two friends, both called Andrew. And we're producing dramas, audio dramas for download, for vinyl, very much rooted in that world of 1970s and 80s influenced strangeness. So we have a new release called Patchwolf, written by Andrew T. Smith, that very much takes its influence from programs like Bagpuss. Sandra Kerr, who did the music for Bagpuss, has done the music for this as well, 50 years on. And it's narrated by Valerie Singleton, who was just a huge figure on 1970s TV. She was a presenter of a children's magazine program called Blue Peter, and her voice is still the same. Valerie, I think, is 88 now, but her voice is identical. So that's taking up a lot of my time as well. Live shows, all kinds of other things. Basically, anything to avoid getting a proper job. That's been my maxim for life.
Please send us the recipe.
Somehow scrape it by. I'm not sure, but I'm hanging on in there.
All right. Okay, Bob. It was really, really, really a great time having you over here.
I've loved it.
Your generosity, your joy of life, your understanding. When you find somebody who shares your own craziness, you feel friends.
Oh, that's really nice.
Immediately, because you are the kind of. So we are really, really felt ourselves talking with a friend, and we really appreciate your generosity, all your time devoted to answer our questions, and of course we will be on touch and always paying attention to the new releases and the new stuff you are producing, because we, as you can do realize, we really love you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been a genuine honor for me. I've loved it. It's been such good fun, and it's really, I've loved speaking to the pair of you. It's been fascinating to hear your stories and theories and memories as well. So keep in touch, and thank you, and hello to everybody in Argentina.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye. Thank you very much indeed.
Is that okay?
See you around.
Total pleasure. Thanks, guys. Keep in touch. Anything I can do for you, just drop me a line. You know where to find me. But
all right.
It's been brilliant. Will you send me a link when it's online, and I'll share it everywhere?
Yes, of
For
course.
sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I will do that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
See
Thanks
ya.
a lot. Bye-bye. Bye.
Ta-da.